Welcome to Coached Soul, a podcast for a better you. Your host, Steve Hudgens, is a licensed professional counselor, and your co-host, Julia Canton, is a therapeutic coach. Together, they discuss various topics, providing a different perspective on life and insight that you are not alone. On a non-emergency basis, you may contact them at area code 918-280-8690 or coachsoul.com to provide them with new topics, feedback, or to request an appearance on the show. And now, here's your host, Steve Hudgens.
Welcome back to the show. Our special guest is one of great value. She has a lot of wisdom. Cinthia Hiett, we welcome you to our show. Julia is taking off due to some personal choice here. Cinthia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really glad to join this and talk with you and all of your audience. I think these are great topics that you have.
Thanks. And one of the things that we want to bring you on, because Julie and I have been talking about gender roles, talking about marriages and things of that nature. Give us a brief idea or a summary of who you are and what makes you a couple therapist.
Well, I was a psychotherapist for quite some time, and then I retired my license and went into life coaching and consulting and systems management. I like working with businesses and how they operate, and then I also do counseling still, all day, every day, practically. And so I just really love it. And I love humans, and I love being able to help them become really the best version of themselves and to enjoy themselves as much as God enjoys them, and being able to be really present and cognizant of the relationship that you're in and really take away a lot of fear, because relationships can be kind of scary.
I like what you say there, because in my own therapy and dealing with couples, one of the things that I look at is we can ask couples, what is the cause of a marriage to dissolve? And a lot of people would say communication. Mm-hmm. And I look at the experience that I have with my own couples and I say, no, I disagree. That's the symptom. Because it's fear induced into the relationship that causes a fear reaction that I can't communicate because I'm afraid to be a rejection, or abandonment. What do you think about fear as being maybe the rooted cause of relationships failing?
Well, I think that is a symptom for sure. When I work with people, what I've come to find dealing with humans, actually, let me back up, because what I talk to people about a lot of times is recognizing that humans are mammals and they share lots of similarities with all the rest of the red-blooded mammals. And that means that there's a fight, flight, or freeze response. It means there's a severe need to be seen and not ignored. And when you look at different groups of animals and you see them making sure they are seen by the group that they're in, and even if that means doing something bad. And we see this with little kids, we see this with teenagers. And so this need to be seen is life-saving and life-giving. And so when people if they don't feel seen, and that means they may be seen for the wrong thing, but they still are seen. And so then they might want to try to adjust their behaviors to be seen positively. Excuse me. And so it comes down to, what is it like for a man to be seen? What is it like for a woman to be seen? And this is where it's imperative that we work very hard at not maybe caving into this idea that people get to choose who they are, choose their gender. We get to choose the kind of person that we want to be, but nobody, I remind clients, nobody consulted me. God did not consult me when he made me. It was his design and he liked it. And basically he said to me, Cinthia, you don't have to like you, but I like you. It's going to make your life a lot better if you figure out how to like you, you know? And so it isn't like this big spiritual, liturgical type of thing I'm talking about. It's about understanding humans. And so we see animals all the time playing with one another, needing to be seen and not ostracized. And so this comes with the breed. And when we then are willing to recognize that there is male and there is female, and I'm not saying that people aren't allowed to make that choice as well, but in the DNA of a man, in the DNA of a woman, if that's the origins that you're beginning from, there are certain things that have to be understood or you can't relate to the opposite sex, and you'll shut it down immediately.
It's interesting because I love archaeology, and
Mhm.
especially the Egyptian piece of, because of the mummification of the bodies that they've done. I've been to the Louvre in London, England, and not the Louvre, sorry, the British Museum. I've been to both. Louvre is in France, and the British Museum, and they have unique displays. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I find interesting is that science is able to determine by the skeleton or by the mummy that they are able to determine male or female.
That's right.
And when you think of relationships and you're talking about being seen, you hear all the time, especially in the therapy world, well, they just don't listen.
Mhm.
Kind of talk about what is the importance of being able to have critical conversations that need to be had in a relationship so that it doesn't shut down our communication.
Well, I think that's a great question. And when you consider the idea of needing to be seen, I don't know if you're familiar with the still face experiment that Dr. Trokey did.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so powerful when you see that little baby actually falling apart because the mom won't look at her. And so when you see that, we also see it in the animal kingdom that they do silly things to be seen, right? And so the part of seeing somebody doesn't mean I agree with them, but if I refuse to see it because I don't like it, then I can't communicate anymore with them. So if I have a client and I'm seeing how they're treating their husband, how they're talking to their husband, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak to her about how she is interacting with her husband and why that's not going to work. And if she continues to do it, then I'll have to say to her, you're either going to be willing to learn a language that makes sense to him as well, or you're going to lose the relationship. And so you're not honoring who's sitting next to you. You're frustrated with how they're expressing themselves or what they're thinking that they need or want or should have or could have, whatever that may be, but they're not taking the time to say, hey, I do need to know what you need. And it doesn't have to make sense to me. It doesn't have to mean that I like it. It doesn't mean that I even want to do it. But I know that if I can't do that one piece, I can't have intimacy, because
Do,
intimacy is about being known.
I mean, that's a valid point and so rich. And when we think about communication, you hit on a vital point here that we need to be seen. We need to be able to feel validated in our feelings. And I think sometimes we overlook the validation when it comes to our partners, our friendships, our coworkers, and especially children. And when we come to communication, especially for women, I talk to men about women need safe place to land, that they need to be able to not have that bear face to come into the relationship as a grizzly bear, because she's going to turn into a serpent and she's going to bite you, and not talking about women being snakes here, but it's just animal kingdom relatable here, that the man can see it as a threat and
Right.
he'll either shut down or run the other way. With today's culture, what do you think has happened to the nucleus of of marriage, of women and men coming together? And I'm not trying to disregard any other relationship. I just want to focus in on one today, because we can go on a rabbit trail in so many other directions. But for the sake of timing, when it comes down to our nucleus of our family, What do you think has happened into the nucleus of the male and the female in relationship?
Well, some of this, I believe, uh, I think that it is, I would like to hope the best that people that are trying to change what we have known has gone on for millennials when it comes to honoring the gender. And I think that what's important is that we're not trying to say to somebody, that's the only way that you can be. But what we do need to say is that there is an original place you came from. And there's somewhere that started within you and you grew out, and then you were able to be born, and then you were able to walk, and then you could ride a bike, then you could do a car, that you could do your own life. But the bottom line is the impetus of where you've come from, whether you like it or not, it doesn't make it evil. It makes it necessary for you to understand where you originated from and how far away from that originating point you want to be. And so I'm born a female, I like being a female, I don't want to change that being a female. That doesn't mean that when I was growing up, I wasn't a tomboy all the time, all the time. And so, I had to give, thankfully my parents gave me time to grow up, to finally go through all the formative years. And we know that 24 is the age of accountability. 24 is when you are fully online as a bona fide adult. So the idea of giving children and teenagers the opportunity to change their sex when they haven't even fully become who they are, it to me is a tragedy. And I'm not saying that people's intentions are wrong. I don't know the people. What I know is that once you make that change, you can't undo it. And so this is where, when we're kids, we play like I was a tomboy for a long time, and this is where it messes up our relationships, because if I'm not clear about who I am, then I'm not going to be able to explain to you what I need and who I am.
Valid point. In therapy, that's one of the things that I try to hone in on is, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Without having placement of labels, that you're a mom, that you're a dad.
And if I can just interrupt that for
Sure.
1 minute, that's a really important thing. It's the idea of, if you don't know who you are and you're still searching, it's going to be very difficult for a partner that is with you, because that makes it almost impossible for them to be able to connect, bond with you, attach to you when you're morphing into other things at any given time. So if you lost the ability to do that, you weren't able to do it in junior high, or you weren't able to do it in high school, or whenever it was, that's an important place to say, I need to love myself enough to stop searching for a better version of me. I need to be the one that decides to be the better version of me.
And it takes courage to have that, especially with today's society, when there's so much negative bombardment of attacking who we are as a person. And that's where I talk to people and I say, okay, here's let's look at your identity. And along the way of our journey, at the same time that we're looking for your identity, we're going to start pulling out things, but give you tools such as how to have healthy emotional boundaries, because that's protecting your identity. Do you think that we were ever taught how to have emotional boundaries?
I don't think if you were born in the 60s or the 50s, they really thought at that time that every child was the same, and the parents were the ones that decided what they would be like. And so they learned as time went on that, we don't decide how a child is going to be. It isn't like this 1, 2, 3 kit, and we decide how we want that to make that kid. We can influence them, right? But there is an identity within them that truly belongs to them. And my sadness with our society now is that no one's seeking that. They are seeking everything outside of themselves to try on all kinds of things to see if it fits, instead of going deeper within and saying, really, who am I? And am I going to respect who I am, care for who I am? Am I going to champion who I am, or am I going to constantly be changing who I am in order to get good feelings?
And that's so important, to be able to understand where we are. so that we can have an idea of how to approach when we get derailed here, and to come to an understanding. But it just seems like our society has gone bonkers, and we're trying to scramble to find our identity. We're trying to scramble who we are. And for parents, there doesn't seem accountability for their children, especially when it gets into social media, getting into their cell phones. I know when my children were growing up, I made a contract. I know it sounds awful, but I made a contract with my daughter that I have, even though phones provided to you, there's going to be stipulations.
That's right.
that that's my property. At the same time, I respect your privacy, but I want to know what's going on in your phone. And the provider that we were going through allowed me to block certain things on the internet from me interacting with their phone. Granted, I can't protect them 24/7, but I can educate them at the same time that I'm trying to protect.
That's true love. That's not easy to do. That is true love, to take that stance. That's how much you love your kids.
And that's what we need to get back into society. That true love is being able to protect, but also give them the space to grow without stifling their knowledge.
But not
And
letting it be free for all either.
correct. And so when it comes to relationships between between two people that come from two different backgrounds, it's learning, how do I communicate effectively? So when we started off with, I know, this gender role idea and the things of things that can disparage a marriage and the unity of marriage, what is it that you think that we can do in society to help people, especially in our relationships, that we can help build our identity with one another? I know we have happiness on the inside, but how can we encourage and envelop and invite other people?
Well, I think before that, I think it's important to remind people that this idea of changing genders and allowing that, or encouraging all of that before the age of 21, and especially of 24, that I think this is one of the things that I say to clients is, I say, obviously you can do whatever you want to do. That's freedom, and freedom is beautiful until we misuse it. But I say to people, who of you would try to frost an unbaked cake? So don't you leave the cake in the oven until it's done, and then you can do whatever you want with it. But if you try to frost an unbaked cake, you have nothing there to work with.
What makes it to where we're so afraid to be unique?
Well, I'm not sure we're afraid to be unique. I think we are afraid to find out who we are, and we're afraid we're not going to like who we find. And
Oh,
I remind people that, listen, there are very, very specific ways that you can learn to love who you are. And then out of love, can decide what needs to be changed. But if you're changing things to chase a feeling, you're thinking, well, if I look like this, if I look like that, if I knew this person, got this person, then it's the if only then syndrome, right? And instead of saying, wait a minute, I have to own me first. I'm always going to be me. Even if my body goes away, I don't believe our spirit does. So I'm always going to be me. I might as well make peace with me. And then I can work on being the best version of me.
what do you think gets in the way of our peace and the best version of being me?
Well, some of it takes work, and some of it we're not willing to accept who we are. We want to be somebody else that we think is in style or that people like. And we don't realize that the more honest we are about who we are, and the more we tend to ourselves, the more that we are containing ourselves so that we are not, this like fireball wrecking the whole entire event that somebody's at because they can't contain themselves, right? It's like if we're able to do that, then we are going to, at the end of the day, have peace because we like how we handled the people that we met. We like how we acted. And so instead of being a 5-year-old version of me and thinking that's cute, I'm like, I'm sorry, but 5-year-old adults are not cute.
I haven't found one to be cute. It's awful challenging for a therapist to try to address our 5-year-old child. And I mean, it's challenging.
Well, see, this is what I do. I do a lot of this with clients. I talk a lot about triunes, right? And so the triune of the me, myself, and I. And so I remind clients, I say, hey, how do I talk to me about myself?
Mm-hmm.
Because that has a lot to do with how settled my internal world is, right? Then I have the parent, adult, child. And I say, okay, so who's running the show? Is the child or the parent or the adult? So if you have a mean parent, why don't you take that parent to task and get them to be a decent, good parent so that that little kid isn't trying to rebel against it all the time?
You know, I just find it interesting in surmising our conversation here that when we try to look out elsewhere outside of ourselves, when we're not accepting who we are, we're constantly running.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder how tired of society we are, or tired of ourselves, or tired of our lives, our jobs, and whatever. And it's because we're not being mindful. Our mind is full of other stuff, but we're not being mindful of who we are as a person. And when I think about having relationships with one another, it's how do I yield? I talk a lot about this in my couples therapy, that we have a stoplight right here at the intersection. What's it used for? To direct traffic.
That's right.
But we don't have that in our communication of saying, babe, I woke up today. I might bite your head off. I'm so sorry. I've got a headache. Please forgive me. Oh, yellow light. To be cautious throughout the day until we can have the green light again in the relationships that we have.
But that's what adults can do.
Yes.
So if we have big people in little bodies or little people in big bodies, then we get a different version and we can't find the adult. So I treat a lot of people that are big bodied adults and the little kid is running the show. And all they're trying to do is placate the little kid instead of holding themselves and that childlike part of them accountable. I remind people, hey, that childlike part of me is fun. People like that part of me, but they like that part of me because I manage her.
Good
I'm
point.
the adult. I'm the adult. I'm the parent. So I make it fun to be with that little girl that is funny and laughing and acting out and, finding all kinds of things to do and experimenting and all that stuff that's fun to do. But I have a parent that's always vigilant watching me.
And sometimes self-awareness we don't like, we wanted to avoid,
Right.
because then it brings us into a state of accountability. And sometimes who wants an adult? We want to escape from adulting.
But this I think you're making a good point, because one of the problems that happens is we don't get the childhood we would like. As an adult, we try to find that childhood again. And I remind people, I say, I don't know anybody that had a perfect childhood or wants to necessarily go back to it. So we have to remind ourselves that the gift of growing up is that I get to decide now. I get to decide how I'm going to parent myself, what I'm going to hold myself accountable for, what I'm going to do or what I'm not going to do. And so the beauty of growing up is I don't have to be under parents that may not be good parents or may not know how to parent well. They didn't want to parent. So that's what growing up is about. If I had to stay a kid, that would be hell on earth.
You think once we start recognizing that child within, that we won't be so mixed up about our identity and our roles?
I would hope to think that, yes. I don't like that this is, I don't usually judge people. I'm always curious about what would drive people to do this. What is the missing piece that this becomes the solution somehow for you, which is actually taking you backwards.
Totally agree. Cinthia, we're almost about out of time. I do appreciate how we can look at, we need to go back to nature to be able to understand that male, female, there's nothing wrong. And we always go to that phrase, there's nothing wrong. It's easier to prove something wrong than it is right. And I like to find the challenge is what's right about being a male and a female. There's so much good privilege that's there, but it's just stopping ourselves from running away from ourselves.
Well, I think what you're saying is the answer is not necessarily outside of us. It's inside of us.
What a great way to end this with that. May y'all be blessed. Until next time, Cinthia is going to join us on another podcast. Stay tuned.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope to have you back next week. Until then, be safe and be kind.